Thanks so much for attending today's seminar on personal finance. We're really fortunate to have Kevin and Andrew here to share their expertise on this topic.
We are definitely delighted that you're all here. Part of me wants to say that I'm very grateful that you all can talk, but I know how free food works, so I'm gonna keep my comments on that. I'm Kevin Mahoney. I'm a certified financial planner and the founder of Illum. It's a fee-only financial planning company.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Katz-Moses. Kevin for inviting me. It's actually my first time meeting Kevin in person. Talked a little bit and didn't realize how similar we looked. I think we would probably use like the same emoji.
Right.
Kevin. Also excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. I used to be an 8th and 9th grade math teacher here in DC. And so most of the people that I work with are teachers or people who work for the school system. If you know any teachers in DC, you can let them know that there are lots of really problematic things in their retirement plans. Reach out to me if they want help figuring it out. So during today's session, we're going to go through a few different key concepts of how to build a strong financial foundation. There are questions that people have throughout. Please, we encourage you to go ahead and ask those. We'll also have a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A.
We received some questions that some of you submitted in advance, so we'll definitely try to address those, but like you said, as new things come up, please don't hesitate.
Yeah, and we'll try to keep this a judgment-free zone. There are no stupid questions. We encourage you to go ahead and ask them, and then we'll try and push you at the end to think of at least one action step that you can take out of this to take your situation forward a little bit. All right, so we're going to start with a quick activity. I'm in the classroom, so I always want to try to start with something engaging. So we have 6 true or false statements here. So turn to 1 or 2 neighbors and go through these 6 and decide whether you think each statement is true or false, and then we'll go through them together. 2 minutes.
They thought they were getting a break. I think questions. But if you have like a for you, like I think it's
Take another 30 seconds to a minute. Okay, let's start with number 1. It's good to carry a credit card balance to help your credit score. You can call it out. What do you think?
volunteers.
A little bit of a mix, but mostly false. Yeah, this is a myth that I've heard a fair amount. You really don't want to keep a credit card balance from month to month if you can avoid it. We'll talk a little bit about high interest debt later, but that's definitely something you want to avoid. Number 2, a proper emergency fund should be 2 to 6 months expenses, but even having $500 can make a big difference. True, yeah, I said call now. Yeah, that's totally true. Don't get too hung up on like, I need to have this much saved. Even having that $500 to protect you if you have like your car breakdown or an unforeseen medical expense or something that happens to, your house, family emergency, having that $500 can prevent you from having to go into credit card debt.
And some of what we'll emphasize today is progress. There are a lot of numbers out there that people say you should be doing X right now, or you should have X amount saved, whatever it might be. For most people, that's not realistic. Student loans, high housing costs, whatever it might be. But if you can make progress on these things over time, including with an emergency fund, you will soon be at a point where you can feel comfortable with that goal and where you are at that time.
Totally. All right, investing $100 in your retirement account is the same as investing $100 of your take-home pay.
Why?
Depends on your tax situation. Usually, there's going to be tax benefits to saving in a retirement account. There are pre-tax benefits usually. Most like workplace 401ks will be pre-tax, but there are also post-tax benefits if you use a Roth retirement account that you don't get if you just take the money home. That's false. Investing $100 now is usually worth more than investing $100 in 5 years. Some nodding, seeing some people being brave. I'm seeing some people being quiet. It's okay. People who are saying yes, why do you say yes?
Dollars later on, or $100 now would be probably value or whatever. Like,
You're
yeah,
right.
yeah. I don't know how to say it, but yeah.
Yeah, over time,
Yeah,
inflation would erode.
inflation, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. You want to, the earlier the better, right? The sooner you can start, the more you can take advantage of interest, growing, returns, compound interest, all that. Number 5, if you have any debt, you should pay it off completely before saving or investing elsewhere. Anybody wanna?
This is probably the trickiest question.
You're right, Kevin. You must be a financial planner. This is the trickiest question. And yeah, sorry, we messed up our Christmas theme. Hello. It depends, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of debt later on. Just because you have debt doesn't mean it has to be the top priority before you can do anything else. Right?
Either this answer is going to be interest rate, both with the debt itself and then.
Yep, absolutely. All right, last one. A fee of 1 or 2% is small and will not make a big difference over time. Kevin.
I think over time, I know the answer. Over time, that can add up to a lot of money. If you're talking about a retirement account that's there for 35 years, stock market, 1 or 2% will be. You'd like to have that money when you're.
Yeah, that's a 1 or 2% fee can be a huge factor in affecting your returns over time, and we'll talk more about these. Okay, first key concept. Can I get someone? This is kind of small. Can I get someone to read this quote? Good eyesight. Or is someone in the front? Go ahead.
Okay.
You raise your hand. Okay. Can someone? What does this quote mean?
As it relates to.
Saving, don't wait to make a change, right? Yeah. This is a good day to take a step forward in your personal finances. This is not a time to say like, I wish I had done this 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We'll go through some things and you might be thinking, man, I really made a mistake a while ago. Don't feel bad about that. You can't change it. The key here, you should start saving now.
That's one of the most common things I hear from people, just really beat themselves up. Things they wish they had done 5 years ago, or mistakes that they now know was a mistake. Even if there's nothing they can do about it, they get too hung up. They devote too much of their mental energy as it relates to finances on things they can't change. And none of us want to spend more time than we have to talking about money, researching money, things like that. So it's it's important to focus your energy on the things.
Yep. We'll illustrate that in a couple of ways. I think a lot of times the way we think about saving is like this. If we're saving, getting up to $5,000 a year, you have $5,000 in year one, year two you have 10, then 15, then 20, so on and so forth. At the end of 30 years, you have about $150,000. But if you're saving and investing, it actually looks a lot more like this. And the money starts to grow and grow and grow and snowball over time because you're getting compound interest. Right? And so the sooner you can start that snowball process and get yourself right, like $5,000 a year over 30 years, even though you've only saved a total of $150,000, your balance is somewhere around $500,000.
You know, the number up there is 5,000, but it can be 50. Like, don't think, oh, I don't have enough yet, or it has to be a certain amount. It can be 25. It can be 50. Nothing else that establishes good habits, so that as incomes do grow, or you have less debt that you need to focus on, that number can become 5,000, but you need to start somewhere.
All right, so let's look at it a different way. Let's imagine two totally fictional people, Evan and Andrew. Evan gets started a little bit earlier.
One is younger and smarter. I'll point.
Yeah. So we're going to imagine that they had the exact same birthday, right? And so when Andrew's 30, Kevin's also 30, but Kevin is saving and Andrew is not. So Kevin starts saving $3,000 a year. He does that every year for 5 years from the age of 30 to 35. And then at 35, he stops saving. He just leaves that money there. Andrew, he waits. He doesn't start saving until he's 40. And he does $3,000 a year for 25 years all the way until he's 65. Okay, so everything else is going to be the same for them, right? Or the return is going to be the same. The total amount of cash, though, Kevin saved just $15,000. Andrew saves $75,000. When they hit their 65th birthday, in your head, make a prediction of how much money you think they have, assuming these amounts saved at these ages. Got it? Still coming up. This is the value of starting early.
Younger and smarter.
Yeah. Handsomer. Okay. So, yeah, and if you're over the age of 30, this is not about feeling bad about that. Didn't start right. Like plant your tree today.
I want to point something out here before we leave it. So it says cash saved, right? There's a big difference between money that's just in your savings account and money that's actually invested in the stock market. Wells Fargo is never going to pay you 9%. That's even a fairly good return in the stock market. I talk to a lot of people who, maybe not where you guys are now, but at some point when you're further along in your careers and less debt and higher incomes, a lot of people park more money than they should in their savings account and let it sit for any number of reasons. They don't know what to do with it. They're concerned about an emergency and maybe have more. The key to hitting this number or achieving that return on your money is putting it somewhere where it works for you. Where specifically that is can depend on your circumstances, but it's usually not in a checking or.
Okay, the next thing we'll talk a little bit about investing. Does anybody know who this is? This is Warren Buffett. Yeah, he's a billionaire, which I don't know. That's not really cool anymore. He's a really famous investor, and this is some of his investment advice. He said pick a broad index like the S&P 500, right? Don't just think you're going to get rich off of buying Tesla stock or Amazon stock or one company stock. Be diversified. And he also talks about costs and investments. Costs are really, really important. If your returns are 7 or 8% every year, talked about a fee of 1% or 2%. That doesn't sound like a lot out of 100, but out of 7 or 8%, you're talking about a quarter of your returns being taken away by fees. So just a quick visual. This is a visual of the S&P 500. If you buy like an index fund or an ETF tied to the S&P 500, what you're really getting is 500 of the top companies in the United States. So you'll get a little bit of Amazon, you'll get a little bit of Apple, you'll get exposure to all these different sectors with one diversified fund.
Yeah.
So say you buy S&P 500 five years ago. I know the values go up and down, but are they okay?
You don't need to worry about it. Is the short answer to that. The benefit, and I was going to ask, are there any questions about the difference between owning a specific stock and the benefits you of having an index fund is that without getting into what the specific companies are, you know that your money is widely diversified among many different companies in the US and or the world. So there are different types of index funds. Some are just small companies. S&P 500 is larger companies. There are index funds that have from other countries in that. So the goal that you want to achieve is to own as many parts of those as you can through one or more index funds. Then you don't have to worry about which companies it is or what the stock market's doing because you know that you're spread around enough that any movements in large US companies isn't going to affect you as much as if you own just Amazon, right? Or if you own just tech stocks, whatever the case might be. It takes a lot of burden off of you and just spreads it around so that you can achieve gains across the board.
But I guess my follow-up with that is like Amazon takes up bigger, Amazon and Apple than say smaller companies. So if Amazon really tanks, for a period of time, that could affect the overall. I mean, I guess any companies that tank the overall.
No, because the index will change. They'll automatically shift which companies are a part of that. So like if Amazon went bankrupt, another company would be substituted into that index, reflect.
Do you think it's worth talking about target date funds?
Sure. I want to answer your question first. Yes. Do you want to?
Yeah, so can you just hold on to that and I promise we'll cover it? Yeah, we'll definitely cover that. So just really quickly on the S&P, and Kevin's totally right, you want to diversify like across different kinds of funds, different index funds. So this is big American companies, and you can also get international companies, and you can also get bond funds and other things like that. But this is kind of a good starting point to visualize what an index fund or a mutual fund gets you with one investment. And over time, right, it's not a straight line of growth. There have been times when it drops, but over time there's been a consistent trend about 7.5% every year adjusted for. Yeah.
I just think like my head or like, but also that there's like events, like world wars and things that happen. That suggests it's always.
Without getting too much into economic theory, I would say it's essentially tied to the growth of the economy and the growth of companies overall across all different types of industries and different size companies. So, like we've all experienced and seen, those biggest dips are going to be maybe during a war, during a recession, after a terrorist attack, where like every company across the board and the economy overall is suffering for one reason or another. But over the long term, companies are coming up with new ideas, new products and services are being invented. And so the economy continues to grow at a trajectory like that. Depending on what index or benchmark you're looking at, the trend will follow that.
always negative.
And more people. Any questions here? All right, now we'll talk a little bit about fees. So let's give a hypothetical example. Let's say you start with $100,000, right? And again, it could be any amount of money. It could be $100, right? Feel discouraged if you don't have $100,000 to invest today. And you earn about a 6% return every year for 25 years. This is what would happen, right? You would start with this amount that you invested, $100,000, and then 25 years later, you'd have a total of $430,000. That's that value of compound interest. Now let's imagine you paid, as if you're paying no fees. Let's imagine if you pay 2% every year in fees. Just make a prediction for how much you think you would lose to fees in this example. How much of that $430,000? You lose about $170,000 just because of that 2% of fees. They're really important to avoid. Every investment that you have is going to come with an expense ratio, which is a percentage of your investment, and that tells you how much you're paying in fees. So anytime you're making an investment, make sure you find out all of the fees you're being charged. If there are any annual fees, if there's an expense ratio, what is it? And that'll give you a sense of how much you're paying in fees.
It's not easy. It's one of the easiest ways to protect your money and grow your money, but no one makes it easy for you to figure out. When you have a retirement plan, when you're buying an investment, it's rare that the fees are right up front and one of the first things you see. You usually have to go digging for it. But if you can avoid financial products that have high fees and stick to the lowest cost stuff, it's one of the best and easiest ways to preserve your money and help it grow for you for the long run. Bunch of questions. You had a question up here first. You still?
Yeah, so when you're talking about 2% fees, is that like you're taking 2% off of 6%, as in like you're actually 4% return, or are you talking 2% of, like, are you doing 6 times 2, or are you doing 0.6?
It's effectively 0.6. It's effectively reducing the return by 2%.
So instead of making, say you made $100,000 a year, are they taking $2,000 off of your $100,000 earnings? Or instead of, does that make sense? Like, because I don't see if that's how the fee structure works, I don't see how you're seeing that drastic of a change. If instead of making $100,000, you're making $8,000. But I do see how instead of making a 6% return, you're really making a 4% return. How that would create.
Yeah, that's what it is.
It's less.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's similar to like inflation in that regard too. So if someone talks about 6% return on its face, well, you have to subtract. If inflation was 3%, then it's really just a 3% return after inflation, and then you have to factor the fees, and all of a sudden, return a little bit less rosy.
Yeah.
Any questions over here? .0. So typically, and I'll let you share your thoughts on this too. Vanguard has long been the leader in the financial services industry as creating low cost products for people and being pretty transparent with what they're doing. You will find their fees pretty easily when you're looking at their funds. And so other people have started to join them slowly but surely, but overall they're still probably the best for that. And with like an S&P 500 index fund, that's the type of fee that you'll pay to own their fund. But you can easily, in a 401k plan, you could easily have 0.98, or for a more exotic fund like some type of real estate or international fund, 1.25. There's usually no reason to do that, because even if those funds perform better in a given year, when you start subtracting all these different things, it's probably not beating the more plain vanilla. Yeah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, coming from the education space, there are super, super high fees in a lot of teacher retirement accounts. I've seen teachers who pay 3.25% every single year for the funds in their retirement.
I feel like retirement account, like that, like a brokerage. Like a broker, I know we call it broker.
So there's a difference between an expense ratio, which you pay to own the fund, and any like sales fees or like commissions you pay a broker to tax. Within a 401k, aside from the fee that like the plan charges just for you to be a participant, you're not paying the same types of brokerage fees as if you were like buying and selling stocks with Charles Schwab or.
I think you make a good point though. There are a lot of different kinds of fees out there if you are investing. And it's really important if you're going to be investing, figure out all the fees that you're being charged from. If there are sales costs, if there are transaction fees, if there are annual fees, if there are vendor fees, like every fee that you're being charged, make sure that if you have a provider, they're transparent about that. And like Kevin said, you may have to go dig for it. All right.
It sounds a little daunting, but I think the best rule of thumb is like simple is best. Like if you can, keep your investments at least at the outset, like in a retirement account, you're usually protected from certain fees that way. Don't go for more exotic financial products or things that you don't understand. Like S&P 500, if you know the term index fund, like you're probably in a good place. But, yeah. It depends. It's a constantly, they're all relatively new and it's still a pretty fluid thing right now. For those places that don't have fees, they're often ultimately trying to get you to become a customer in some other way. So maybe on, at the outset for some type of service, there are no fees, but expect to have their specific products pushed to you, even if it might not be the best option for you, or they want you to become a customer of their bank or whatever it might be. Just be wary of that stuff if you see someone advertising like everything's free, 0%. Yeah. I do think those can be a good way to get started with investing, especially if like you're still in school and maybe you're interested in just getting a feel for it and contributing a little bit. I think it's good exposure to the stock market and how this all works. I typically begin to steer people away from that as they get a little bit older and there are more things at stake and like other elements of their life that come into play, but I don't think there's much harm in it as a start.
Yeah. All right, so next, just a simple equation of how to build wealth. You just got to spend less than you earn. You don't need to make a ton of money to become wealthy, and making a lot of money doesn't guarantee that you'll become wealthy. There are people who make hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, and retirement is very difficult for them because they spend almost all of that money, and then they have a lifestyle that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and not enough savings to support it in retirement. So that's pretty much it.
Does anyone know the phrase lifestyle creep? Guesses as to what?
Doing things normally would never do. So even though you're making money, you didn't.
Yeah, it's essentially inflation of your lifestyle. So and oftentimes it's like subconscious. You don't even realize what's happening, but you get a raise, you get a bonus, whatever it might be, and that money just kind of flows through your budget with everything else, and you feel wealthier. Like you feel like you have more money, and so when you're out at a bar or you're out at dinner, like you don't think twice about, oh, do I really need or want X? And before you know it, like maybe you haven't actually gotten value out of that additional money because it's just kind of like disappearing in the course of a week. And that's really, that equation sounds simplistic and easy, but really important to keep a concept like that in mind as you're trying to save for retirement and build savings, because the more aware you can be of where your money is going and what you value, what you really want to spend your money on, it'll be that much easier to.
So the greater delta you can have between those two things, the more you have to sort of save. So this is a visual. It's not perfect, doesn't necessarily apply to every single person equally. It's sort of a guide to think about how to prioritize your income. You can sort of imagine you have like a picture of money left over from your income, and after you've paid your fixed expenses, your rent, your internet, phone bill, all that kind of stuff, make sure you've got an emergency fund saved. It doesn't have to be 3 to 6 months. Depends on a lot of factors. Depends on how stable your job is. People say 10% of income. Some people say more like 20 if you're self-employed and your income's not quite as stable. Once you've got that cash set aside to protect you from emergency expenses, then you want to look at your debt. Like we said earlier, you don't necessarily have to pay off all your debt in order to move on to the next step, but you want to make sure you have a really clear strategy to approach your debt, and we'll talk about that next. Once you've got a debt strategy, then you want to look at your retirement accounts. And can anybody tell me why retirement accounts come before after-tax investments like you might have in your Robinhood account or Acorn account? Why would retirement come first? Yeah, it has tax advantages. Yeah, usually those are pre-tax, but they can also be post-tax with a Roth. And a lot of times people recommend, if you expect your income and tax rate to go up, that a lot of times you can get a lot of benefit out of paying taxes now and using a Roth retirement account.
People often also think differently about the money that's here and the money that's here. People will often forget what their balance is in these accounts, or even they don't, it doesn't factor into how they spend money and how they think about the money that they have. Whereas in some cases, the money in the savings account, or even just a taxable brokerage account that's not a retirement account, people feel like it's more accessible. And so people feel like, oh, that's money I have for this big trip, or this bachelor party, whatever it might be. And so that money is often more at risk to maybe not being spent in the ideal way, depending on your goals, compared to putting that money in a retirement account and just forgetting about it until you're like 50, and it's like, oh, hey, great, I have this like pretty good balance in my IRAs now.
So this is something I've always been. I was in a company for a year. They had a company 401k, and then when I left the company, the only real option they gave me was money comes out, you have to pay taxes. Is there a way to transfer that money into a different account without paying those fees?
When did that happen? How long ago?
3 or 4 years ago.
It might be tough at this point. Did you already, so you already paid taxes on?
I don't care about
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is something that we see a lot with teachers in the pension plan in DC public schools. You don't vest until 5 years, so all your contributions, if you leave before 5 years, they just give you a check with those. Sometimes people do, they end up thinking, okay, I need to cash this and pay taxes on it. But you can do what's called rolling it over into an IRA, and then you prevent the taxes being paid. You can have it in your own personal rollover IRA account in a place like Vanguard or Schwab or Fidelity or whatever, and defer the taxes.
Anytime you leave a company, you generally have 2 options. One is to roll it into your new company's 401k, and then the other one is the IRA route. Ideally, you never touch that money, you never see it. You just have usually 2 different financial institutions, like the old one and the new one. You tell one, hey, send that money over here. Tell this one, hey, expect this money to come from them. You don't see it. Sometimes their process will insist that they send it to you, and you just want to, as soon as that check comes in the mail, you want to get it out the door as quickly as possible. The IRS gives people a 60-day window to send that on to the new, or I don't know.
And I think one of the questions I saw was just general guidelines and goals. I think for retirement savings, shooting for saving at least 10% of your income in retirement accounts as a floor for what you should try to do is usually a good way to set yourself up for retirement in your mid-60s. You want to retire with a little bit more comfort and lifestyle expenses, you can bump that up to maybe 15%, or that can get you to retire a little bit earlier. And then if you want to retire even earlier than that, 20% or higher. They may read any of those like early retirement blogs or, yeah. So then you're looking at like trying to really crank those retirement savings up, 20%, 30%, Mr. Money Mustache, right? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just cooking rice and beans and sending money to the 401k. I'm all for it. I support it. Not everybody wants to live that lifestyle though.
The two most important things to me on that note is you are ever offered a company match, take the match. And if you have other things going on like student loans or else, get the match. And then I think something like a 10% rate is certainly a good benchmark. Try to increase it by 1%. A new calendar year rolls around, bump that up by 1%. You probably won't even notice the difference in your paycheck. And then when this is where that progress concept comes in. Get a raise, when you get a bonus, make sure you're using that opportunity to increase the rate or the contribution even. And if you can keep doing that over a period of years, you can get to 15% or even higher relatively easily because they've all been small changes along the way rather than starting out and being like, I'm going to save 20% of my income.
Yeah, it's usually easy to adjust the dials on things than to start brand new things. So just start, do a little bit, and then you can.
Yeah. Sorry. So the Roth IRAs are pre-tax.
They're treated differently from a tax perspective.
So I guess my question is how we're as like before we were getting like 1090. Could that be contributed?
Yeah, so these are actually, they have different tax treatment usually. A traditional IRA is usually any contributions you make to a traditional IRA, you can deduct those contributions from your income, and then you don't pay taxes on those contributions. There are some exceptions to that, but the Roth IRA is post-tax. You do pay taxes on that income. The tax benefit of the Roth IRA is your money grows and grows and grows, and then when you take it out at retirement, you don't have to pay any taxes on the gains. Typically, if you make investments in Robinhood or Acorn, your money doubles and you pull it out, you're going to have to pay capital gains taxes on the growth of the money. The benefit of the Roth is you don't have to do that.
Strong opinions on which one?
It really, like every answer in financial planning, it depends. It depends on your situation and what you plan to have happen. Typically, if you expect your tax rates to go up in the future, taking the tax hit now and putting the money in a Roth IRA can be good. If you expect your tax rates to be lower in the future, going pre-tax in the traditional IRA or pre-tax in the company 401k can be good. But ultimately, we don't know what's going to happen with tax rates in the future. You don't know what's going to happen with your income. I usually recommend people have some mix of the two.
There's a lot of debate about which one is. Ultimately, I don't care which one you pick as long as. I would say the Roth typically has more flexibility. You can withdraw your principal invested, the amount that you've actually contributed without any taxes or penalties. You can take it back. There are some, the IRS lets you take out some of the earnings in certain cases for a home purchase. There's a little bit more flexibility there. So I'd probably lean toward that one, but don't let that hang you up. Like, just pick one of them and go. You can convert a traditional into.
So is this also applicable paid. So you should account for all of that before.
Yeah, I think definitely like down here, if you're doing post-tax investments in, you know, like a taxable Vanguard account or Robinhood or Acorn or whatever, you should know that if you see like, oh, hey, I made $500 in this, you should know that when you pull that out, you're probably going to have to pay some capital gains taxes. And there's also short-term and long-term capital gains. And if you pull it out within a year, it's taxed at your ordinary income rate, whereas longer than a year, it's a rate. But that's probably getting a little.
It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like you're paying those taxes because your money has grown in the stock market. I think it's probably helpful to think of some of these options as like a checklist that you just work your way down as your career progresses and your income grows. So let's say your company offers a 401k or 403b, something like that. You start with that, right? And then once you're at a good place with that, then you start contributing to an IRA, or maybe you're doing the IRA earlier if you don't have access. Okay. And then with the taxable brokerage account that you asked about, where you would pay capital gains taxes, that's, you know, somewhere like 3 or 4 on the list. That after you're doing all these other things well, instead of having that money just sit in your savings account and earn 1%, there are often circumstances where it makes sense to put the money in that taxable account because you can pull it out. It's accessible to you. You just pay taxes on the growth while it's been in there. So that's often a good tool to have beyond the retirement accounts once those are.
And just to sum it up, if I was a graduate student and I had covered these first 2 buckets and I had a little bit of extra money, and I expected my income to go up and therefore my taxes to go up, I would definitely look at that Roth IRA. Okay. All right, so now we'll talk about debt. This is just a quick visual of, actually kind of weird because like really at this level you should be like go, pay it off, but I don't know, I can flip it upside down maybe. So interest rate on your debt, as Kevin said earlier, is really, really important. If you're in the 0 to 5% interest rate, it's not necessarily like an emergency to pay that off. A lot of home mortgages are at that rate. Some student loans, it really depends. Car often, yeah, in some high car payments. But yeah, hopefully they're in that 0 to 5% range. If it's at 8% or above, that's debt you really want to prioritize paying off or figuring out a way to lower your interest rate. Credit card debt is usually going to be in that category. Other high interest loans are there. If it's in between that 5 to 8% interest rate, it kind of depends on your circumstance. Some student loans can be in that range, some car loans, and other things like that. But the interest rate is really important.
So here's an example of advice I might give. Someone has credit card debt with a 17%. They also have a car loan with a 4% interest rate. They want to be contributing something to their long-term savings, something to retirement. I'm probably going to tell them to put all of their money, their extra money, toward the credit card payment and get that off the books. And then once that's gone, you know, they've essentially earned a return of 17% on that money because they're not paying that payment. But after that, we're probably putting at least some money into their retirement account or their long-term savings because the rate that they're likely to get on that money is probably as good as or better than the rate on their car loan. So I want them to be giving themselves the opportunity to achieve that rate, and then we'll keep paying the minimum on the car loan. Maybe at some point we switch up the ratio a little bit, but that's where in that case you can feel like you have the permission and the opportunity to put your money to something other than just a debt. Questions on this?
Let's illustrate it a little bit. So let's imagine, you know, you go and you land a job paying a little bit more money and you're able to put away $200 every single paycheck into your 401k. And you're doing exactly what you're supposed to. You take advantage of the compound interest that we talked about earlier. You end up with about a little over $500,000 at the end of a 30-year career. Now let's imagine instead of doing that, you took $200 every paycheck and you got into credit card debt with it. This is, I think, earning 7% interest every year, which would be a pretty good return on your investments. What do credit card companies charge in interest rates? What? 21%? Yeah. What else? Have you seen higher than that?
4.9%.
Yeah. I saw 25.78 recently. But let's say 20%. Let's say $200 every paycheck and 20% interest over 30 years. You're looking at being in the hole about $10 million. You can't keep up with high interest credit card debt. Even if you're saving and doing the right thing, you got to get rid of it. And you got to and that's why that's like emergency, get rid of it as quickly as possible. It's very difficult to keep up with. Student loans. Evan, pass it to you first.
Student loans are not fun. They're very confusing. You could talk, this could be an entire session. Without getting too into the weeds of what the different situations in here, I'll just try to pass along a couple of general rules, and if you have, there are good options for income-driven. Fortunately, there are a few too many of them, so it's often which eligible for and which ones are best for you. But for people who will have student loans after they graduate, there are often opportunities to repayments by signing up for one of these plans. So before you jump into one, or before you don't even pay attention to them at all, it's really helpful as a starting point to try to understand how they might apply to your life, so that payment. Federal loans work quite differently than private student loans. Specifically, federal loans come with a lot of benefits that a private. So be very careful about getting rid of those benefits by refinancing your loans with a private lender into just one new single. For people who reach a point in life where they want to jobs, work a little bit less, whatever the case might be, those federal benefits often give you that chance because of those incomes. Whereas a private lender is just going to say, here are the terms of the agreement, we want your payment each month. And that's often a good reason to stick with the federal loan, even if refinancing might give you a more favorable. There are two types of loan forgiveness: public service. Go ahead.
There's a federal loan thing too, which we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, sometimes to be eligible for the income-driven repayment, consolidate different federal loans into one loan, and then apply to the programs. Sometimes it's not necessary, but I think more often not, the consolidate is to. So with the loan forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness is probably the one that gets the most attention. As we were talking about this earlier, it has had its fair share of bad press. Good reason. When the program was first started, the rules were not very well communicated. People who signed up for the program often didn't, based on their own fault or someone else's fault, what they were getting themselves into. And so now that 10 years, more than 10 years have passed since the program started, almost all those people who started at the outset haven't actually been. 99% of people in this program are getting rejected. Loan forgiveness. I don't think that number will actually hold in the years ahead, because I think as more attention is placed on the program and how it works and what people need to do to be people, more people will actually those guidelines and have their loans forgiven. It's a great benefit if it fits your career and stay on top of the rules because your balance is forgiven. The second option, and I should note with that one, the forgiveness is not taxed. So you don't pay, they're essentially giving you this money that pays off your balance. You don't pay tax on that money. It is not true for the second type of loan forgiveness. So the second type of loan forgiveness happens as part of one of those income-driven plans where you tell them your income, you certify that with them, make your payments on time every month for 20 or 25 years, depending on when you're part of. If there's still a balance remaining at that time, there often is because interest will continue to grow and compound while you're making those payments. The government will forgive that remaining balance. However, under current tax rules, that is considered income to you. So the big surprise for some people, or at least the thing that they need to plan for, is that 20 years, I need to prepare to have a big tax payment due because I just had this payment. So at some point in that 20 to 25 year time span, you need to become aware of that and start saving a little bit for that tax payment because it could be $5,000. You file your taxes in 40, and it's like, hey, you owe the government $80,000. So you just have to, if you're going to go down that path, you just have to prepare for that. There's a chance that policy could change and the law could be written so that it's not taxable, but we added a few websites here for good reading. Questions you want to ask?
Normally, like, more expensive. So is that true?
Generally speaking, yes. A bond is in theory, it depends on what the stock market and the bond markets at a given time, but over the long term, a bond investment is a more conservative investment. Lower risk, so lower return. I generally don't like young people to have much money in bonds because we have so much, and I say that mainly for retirement accounts. The case can be a little bit different if we're talking about that taxable brokerage account, and it's more of like a short to medium term savings. But if you're 22, 25, 30, you have 30 plus years until retirement, which is essentially what a lot of these long-term savings are for. You want to be in that aggressive because you want to maximize opportunities for returns so that you can have as much as possible when you anything short of that may leave you short of sufficient funds when you're
Are there, like, is like the percentage?
no, it generally works the same way. Essentially behind the scenes, like the companies that are putting those together are going through this processes, or at least they want to make the same amount of money off of different things. So I would say they're generally similar. But the tracks work the same way, right? There are bonds that have very high fees. There are that will have low. Just hypothetically.
And it's looking to be done. You have a husband. Same amount as student loans. How do you go about that?
That's the single most common question I get from the people I work with. We can talk specifically after. It's a trade-off that totally depends on your person. I have some people who reach a certain age or a certain point in life, whether they get engaged, married, preparing to have a child, and they think they should own a house. Even if it doesn't make like financial sense, like the same people will say, we think we want to buy a house. We're not sure if we're going to stay in DC for more than 2 years. Buy a house. It's not a prudent financial move. But for some people, like some aspects of home ownership or what they can get in a house, they really value. It's really important to them. And if that's how they want to use their money, then I can tell them no. Let's just make sure that we're making smart moves with the student loan payments, and maybe understanding and accepting the sacrifices or the trade-offs that come with. We can talk about it. Yeah.
Question. I've heard different opinions. What are your opinions?
Yeah, and I don't want to cop out and say it depends, but it depends. I think one of the things Kevin just mentioned was how long you plan to stay in your house if you're going to buy it. You're essentially, when you buy a house, you're locking in a home payment for the next 15 or 30 years, whatever the term of your mortgage is. And in the first few years, you're paying a lot of interest on that loan. It's a really big loan. 20 years from now, costs for renting will have gone up probably significantly, but you'll still be paying the same price. So if you expect to stay somewhere for a long time, buying a house tends to be more advantageous. Another factor to look at is how much are you able to afford on a house, both in terms of a down payment and a monthly payment as a percentage of your income. So if you can afford a mortgage payment that's like 25, maybe 33% of your income, and you have the cash to put down, usually 20% down is going to get you the most favorable mortgage, then it can be a really good decision. But I think a lot of people tend to be biased toward thinking that they need to buy a house, when it's not always necessarily the best choice. Renting can be perfectly fine. I like not having to fix my dishwasher or worry if the water heater goes out that I need to pay $10,000 for a repair.
Renting gets a really bad country for not always good reasons. How many people have heard if you're renting, you're essentially throwing your money away? But renting has benefits, right? Like especially in a city like DC that's so expensive. The same couples that I'll talk to who are interested in buying a house will also tell me like, oh, we live in Navy Yard, like we can walk to like coffee shop and restaurant, like Metro is right there. You know, my commute to work is really short. And then they'll be like, oh, we want to buy a house, but I think the only house we can afford is out in Maryland, like an hour outside the city. It's like, well, wait a second, like you just told me how much you love your current life based on where you currently live. Why do you want to ditch that so quickly just to say you have a house? While buying a house certainly makes sense in some circumstances, for a lot of people, renting is better, at least for, until you're at a point in life where you have good stability, both financially and career, and you just have a better sense of what your life is going to look like for the next 5, 10, 15. So I wish people thought more fondly of it. Other questions in the back about loans or something else?
Let's see, what's next? Oh yeah, we talked a little bit about the tax benefit of saving for retirement. This is just a quick visual. It's overly simplified, but just imagine you have, on your paycheck, you've got $2,000 in gross pay, right? And then if you've ever gotten a paycheck, you get a much sadder number over here in net pay, right? Because you get money taken out. So let's assume, just for this simple example, you're getting 25% of your check taken out for taxes. So you lose $500, you come home with $1,500. If you are saving pre-tax, let's say $200, then before this money gets taxed, this $200 goes off into your 401k or off into your retirement account. And now when you go to get taxed, The government doesn't see $2,000 anymore, they see $1,800, and when they take their 25%, it's $50 less, right? So these two together, you give yourself a $25 boost for every $100 that you're saving. You will have to pay taxes on it eventually, but the idea is be strategic about when that is and control your tax rate that way. And it also has an opportunity to grow over time.
Ahead of this session, I was like, all right, I'm gonna brush up on my tax rules for PhD students. My wife got her PhD. I remember the tax questions and the tax process was very. I was like, all right, I'm gonna brush up, so I'm ready with some tips. It's messy, and I was like, I got to the point where I was like, I'm not gonna pretend that I'm an expert in this and be like, here, you should do X, Y, and Z. There's a good blog. It's called Personal Finance for PhDs. If you're not with it already, the author is not a CPA or anything like that, but went through the process herself and exploring different issues. So it's just starting there. It just sounds like it actually reminded me of student loan options. Like you just have to really be on top of every element. You have to like question the documents that are sent to you. Not assume that anything is right or that you have like all the info you need. I mean, it's unfortunate. It sucks, right? Like with all the other stuff you have going on, this shouldn't be something that you have to devote all this time and energy to. But so that's where I'll leave that part of the conversation. It's unfortunate, but the more you can stay on top of it and question the stuff that you're doing, I think the better off. With that, we're past time. If there are other questions. Yeah, did we leave everyone just like depressed and daunted?
I mean, I don't think I'm putting that. You take that off.
All right, let's talk.
We'll hang around for a few
We'll get
minutes
to
if
this.
people have individual questions.
Yeah.
Offer, like,
No,
you
great,
understand what I'm
great
saying?
question. Yeah, so we both own our own financial planning company. So we're more similar than we are different, and we're certainly more similar than most financial advisors and most financial companies that are out there. But yeah, we'd be happy to talk. Yeah, it's messy. So we both have the licenses that the government requires. I'm a certified financial planner, which is the highest designation. How long I've been doing this for and the exact past. I know Andrew's working toward that and we'll be there. So he's good in my book. If you want me to vouch for him.
All right, well, I'm going to end the seminar recording now so we can move to any individual questions. So thank you so much, Kevin and Andrew, for coming and sharing all of your wealth of knowledge, financial fun. And thank you to everyone for attending today.
Absolutely.